November 8, 1944. The frosted fields outside Morville-les, Vic, France. The diesel exhaust hung thick in the pre-dawn cold as Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers, tank commander of Company A, 761st Tank Battalion, scribbled a final letter home to his mother in Tecumseh, Oklahoma. "Mama, they said we couldn't do it. They said colored boys couldn't handle these steel beasts. Tomorrow, we show them what the Black Panthers are made of. If I don't make it back, know that I died, proving every doubter wrong." Through the morning mist rolling off the Moselle, he had just witnessed German Mark V Panthers repositioning along the ridgeline, the same ridge his battalion would have to cross in less than 6 hours. The 761st Tank Battalion didn't begin in the glory of French battlefields. It began in the segregated heat of Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, where the contradictions of American democracy crystallized into steel and flesh. April 1, 1942. The War Department activated the battalion as an experiment, one the Army didn't expect to succeed. Negroes lacked the mental capacity and mechanical aptitude for armored warfare. Read an internal memo from the Armored Force School at Fort Knox. The Negro soldier, according to prevailing military doctrine, was suitable for service units, labor battalions, quartermaster duty, not combat, never the sophisticated machinery of modern war. They were wrong from day one. The 761st assembled at Camp Claiborne under the command of white officers, a requirement of Jim Crow military policy that denied black soldiers leadership positions, regardless of qualification. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates took command, a West Point graduate who would prove himself one of the rare white officers willing to fight for his men against the Army's own prejudice. His executive officer, Major Charles Wingo, and the company commanders, Captains David Williams, Ivan Harrison, and John Long, were all white. Every platoon leader, white. The highest rank a black soldier could achieve in the battalion was technical sergeant. But the enlisted men and non-commissioned officers, they were exceptional. Ruben Rivers had worked as a railroad porter and hotel bellhop before the war. Samuel Turley, a sharecropper's son from Georgia, could strip and rebuild a Ford Vate engine blindfolded. Warren Crecy had 2 years of engineering school at Tuskegee Institute before the Depression dried up his family's money. Floyd Dade had operated heavy construction equipment in Chicago. These weren't uneducated men. These were Americans who had been systematically denied opportunity, now given a 72,000-pound medium tank and told to prove themselves worthy of citizenship they already possessed by birth. The training was brutal by design. Camp Claiborne in summer felt like training inside a furnace. Temperatures exceeded 100 degrees inside the M4 Sherman tanks. The Sherman, officially the medium tank M4, weighed 33 tons combat loaded, powered by a Continental R-975 radial aircraft engine producing 400 horsepower. Main armament: a 75mm M3 gun with 90 rounds of ammunition. Secondary armament: 150 caliber M2 Browning heavy machine gun on the turret, 2 30 caliber machine guns, 1 coaxial, 1 bow-mounted. Armor: maximum 3 inches on the glacis plate, tapering to 1 inch on the sides. Maximum road speed, 30 miles per hour. Operational range, 120 miles. The crews had to master gunnery, driving, radio operation, maintenance, and combined arms tactics. A Sherman crew consisted of 5 men working in violent, deafening coordination: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver who also operated the bow machine gun. The commander stood in the turret, scanning for targets through vision blocks, or when suicidal courage demanded it, with his head exposed above the hatch. The gunner sat to the commander's front left, eye pressed to the telescopic sight, right hand on the turret traverse control, left on the elevation wheel. The loader, arguably the most physically demanding position, grabbed 40-pound shells from the ready racks and slammed them into the breech, often while the turret rotated and the tank bucked over rough terrain at 20 miles per hour. Training casualties weren't uncommon. Private Leonard Smith lost 3 fingers to a recoiling breech mechanism during gunnery practice in August 1942. Corporal James Davis suffered a fractured skull when his driver threw the transmission into reverse without warning during a pivot turn drill. The Army didn't modify training standards for these accidents. If anything, white instructor cadre pushed harder, waiting for the battalion to fail to confirm their prejudices. Instead, the 761st excelled. By October 1942, the battalion's gunnery scores ranked in the top 15% of all armored battalions Army-wide. Their vehicle maintenance metrics exceeded standards, 92% operational readiness, compared to an Army average of 83%. They completed the 25-mile forced march with full combat load in 4 hours, 42 minutes, 11 minutes faster than required. But excellence didn't earn respect. When the battalion moved to Camp Hood, Texas, in January 1943, for advanced training, they found a segregated base where black soldiers couldn't enter the main post exchange, couldn't attend the base theater except in a colored balcony section, couldn't eat in the same mess halls as white troops. The battalion area was separated from white units by a physical fence. Armed military police enforced a color line. Black tankers returning from weekend passes were beaten by local Texas law enforcement in the towns near the base, beaten for wearing their United States Army uniforms with too much pride. Lieutenant Colonel Bates filed official complaints. He was told to keep his men in line. Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, yes, that Jackie Robinson, future Brooklyn Dodger, was court-martialed at Camp Hood in July 1944 for refusing to move to the back of a military bus. The charges were eventually dropped, but the message was clear. The uniform didn't grant dignity. Yet the 761st continued training. They mastered the M5 Stuart light tank, a 17-ton speedster with a 37mm gun, useful for reconnaissance but hopelessly outgunned against German armor. They practiced indirect fire, using tanks as makeshift artillery to lob 75mm high explosive rounds over hills onto map coordinates. They ran company-level assault drills, coordinating with infantry mock-ups, white infantry units, who refused to actually train with them. So they improvised, using their own dismounted crewmen to simulate rifle squads. The mockery followed them everywhere. A white armored battalion at Camp Hood staged a minstrel show featuring men in blackface, pretending to be incompetent tank crews. The 761st heard about it. They said nothing. They let their scores speak. By spring 1944, the battalion was rated combat ready. They waited for deployment orders. D-Day came June 6, 1944, without them. The Normandy invasion involved 39 tank battalions. None were black. The Army shipped the 761st to England in August, then held them in a staging area near Southampton for another month. No explanation, just waiting. Finally, on October 10, 1944, they landed at Omaha Beach 4 months after the initial invasion. The beach was now a logistics depot, safe and organized. They convoyed inland, joining General George Patton's Third Army. Patton didn't want them either. The general had publicly stated his belief that Negro soldiers were inferior fighters, suitable only for service duties. But Third Army had suffered devastating tank losses in the brutal hedgerow fighting through Normandy and the breakout operations across France. Patton needed tanks. He reluctantly accepted the 761st, with one condition: they would prove themselves immediately, or be pulled from combat, and reassigned to hauling supplies. Lieutenant Colonel Bates gathered the battalion. "They expect us to fail," he told them. "They want us to fail. Show them what Black Panthers can do." The battalion had adopted the nickname during training, the Black Panthers, with a snarling panther head painted on their Sherman hulks. The symbolism was deliberate, fierce, unexpected, underestimated. On November 2, 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion entered combat for the first time, attached to the 26th Infantry Division. Their objective: push east toward the Moselle River, secure crossings, and break through German defensive lines protecting the Lorraine region. They had 6 days to prove 300 years of racism wrong. The 761st's baptism of fire came in the Forêt de Coëquin, a dense woodland east of Château Salins. November 2nd. Dawn. Company A led the advance. 12 Shermans moving in column formation along a muddy logging road. Visibility: 30 yards. Radio discipline: absolute. The forest swallowed engine noise, creating a claustrophobic acoustic dead zone where a German Panzerfaust team could hide behind any tree. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers commanded the lead tank, call sign Able 1. At 26 years old, Rivers had never been in combat, but he'd memorized every page of the Armored Force Field Manual. His driver, Private Eddie Donald, kept the Sherman in second gear, tracks churning through ankle-deep mud. The forest smelled like rotten cordite. Previous fighting had left the trees shattered, German and American bodies unrecovered in the undergrowth. 08:15 hours. The forest erupted. A German 75mm PaK-40 anti-tank gun, concealed in a carefully constructed hide 200 yards ahead, fired. The armor-piercing round screamed downrange at 2,700 feet per second, striking Able 3's glacis plate with a sound like a cathedral bell struck by a sledgehammer. The shell penetrated, igniting ammunition. The Sherman's turret blew 30 feet into the air. All 5 crew members died instantly. Rivers didn't hesitate. "Gunner, traverse left, tree line, 2 o'clock, muzzle flash." His gunner, Sergeant George Davis, spun the turret. The PaK-40 fired again, missing high. Davis centered the crosshairs, pressed the firing trigger. The 75mm gun roared, the entire tank rocking backward from recoil. The high-explosive shell detonated directly on the German position, silencing the gun. But more guns opened up. German infantry, with Panzerfausts, handheld-shaped charge anti-tank rockets, rose from spider holes. One struck Able 4, blowing off the right track. The crippled Sherman slewed sideways, blocking the narrow road. The column was trapped. Rivers made a decision that would define his short, brilliant combat career. He ordered his driver to push Able 4 off the road, a 33-ton bulldozer job that exposed his tank's thinner side armor to German fire. For 90 seconds, Able 1 sat motionless, engines screaming, tracks spinning, shoving the disabled tank into the ditch, while Panzerfaust rockets hissed past and small arms fire sparked off the turret. The road cleared. The column advanced. Rivers had saved the mission in the first 15 minutes of combat. By nightfall November 2nd, Company A had pushed through the Forêt de Coëquin, destroying 3 German anti-tank guns, 1 armored car, and an estimated 40 infantry. American losses: 2 Shermans destroyed, 1 damaged, 7 tankers killed, 4 wounded. For a unit's first day in combat, these were acceptable casualties. But for the 761st, acceptable meant nothing. They weren't being judged by normal standards. 3rd Army Headquarters requested an after-action report by 0600 the next morning. Patton wanted data. The report noted Company A's successful advance, aggressive tactics, and effective combined arms coordination with infantry from the 26th Division's 328th Infantry Regiment. There was no mention that the 328th's white soldiers had initially refused to share their foxholes with black tankers during overnight positions, forcing the 761st's crews to dig separate positions 50 yards behind the infantry line. No mention that German propaganda leaflets found in the forest specifically targeted black soldiers, promising them better treatment as prisoners than they received from their own army. Just the tactical facts. They spoke loudly enough. November 3rd through 7th, the 761st continued offensive operations, pushing toward the Moselle. The terrain was miserable. Rolling hills, thick mud, villages reduced to rubble by artillery. Every stone house was a potential German strongpoint. Every church steeple hid an observer directing fire. The weather turned, freezing rain mixed with sleet, reducing visibility to near zero and turning roads into ice rinks. Private E5 Warren Crecy, gunner in Company B, earned his first Silver Star on November 5th. His tank, Baker II, was supporting an infantry assault on the village of Vic-sur-Seine when German machine gun fire from a fortified barn pinned down an entire rifle platoon. Crecy's commander, Sergeant David Jones, was killed by sniper fire while exposed in the turret. Crecy took command from the gunner's position, a near impossible feat, directing his driver by shouting instructions while simultaneously engaging targets. He destroyed the barn with 4 high-explosive rounds, then suppressed 2 additional machine gun nests, allowing the infantry to advance. Crecy would earn 3 more Silver Stars before war's end, making him one of the most decorated enlisted men in Third Army. But individual heroism wasn't enough. The battalion needed a defining moment, a battle so decisive that even their critics couldn't deny their effectiveness. That moment came at Arracourt, November 8, 1944. Intelligence reports indicated German armor concentrations near the village of Morville-les-Vic, approximately 3 miles northeast of Arracourt. The German 11th Panzer Division, a veteran formation that had fought in Russia, was repositioning to counterattack American forces crossing the Moselle. Third Army tasked the 761st with blocking this movement, holding a ridgeline that dominated the approach routes. It was a classic armored mission. Occupy terrain. Attrit enemy forces. Prevent breakthrough. On paper, straightforward. In reality, suicide. The 761st would face German Mark V Panthers, the most formidable tank in the European theater. The Panther mounted a long-barreled 75mm KK-42 gun that could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could only penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at ranges under 500 yards, and that assumed a perfect 90-degree impact angle. The Panther's sloped armor, 80mm thick, at 55 degrees on the glacis, was virtually immune to the Sherman's gun, beyond close range. The tactical math was grim. To kill a Panther, a Sherman crew had to close to point-blank range, expose themselves to devastating fire, and land a near-perfect shot on the Panther's thinner side or rear armor, all while the Panther could kill them from comfortable standoff distances. The 761st had 54 operational Shermans. Intelligence estimated 40 to 50 German tanks, including at least 20 Panthers, plus supporting infantry and assault guns. Lieutenant Colonel Bates briefed his company commanders in a frozen barn outside Arracourt. The plan: Companies A and C would occupy the ridgeline in hull-down positions, tanks positioned behind terrain so only the turret was exposed, minimizing the target profile. Company B would remain in reserve, prepared to counterattack any German penetration. Attached infantry from the 26th Division would secure the flanks. Bates didn't sugarcoat the odds. We're outgunned. Every engagement will be at a disadvantage. But we have terrain. And we have surprise. The Germans don't expect us. They don't think we can fight. Use that. Staff Sergeant Rivers led Company A to the ridgeline at 0400, darkness masking their approach. 15 Shermans dug in along a 1,200-yard front, each tank scraped into the cold earth to maximize protection. Rivers positioned Able 1 on the far right flank, where the ridgeline curved slightly, offering a sight line down the German approach route. They waited, diesel engines idling, heaters useless against the cold. Loader Staff Sergeant Horatio Scott distributed rations, cold hash, crackers, instant coffee that tasted like battery acid. Gunner George Davis cleaned the breech mechanism for the 10th time, a nervous ritual. Driver Eddie Donald carved a piece of wood with a pocket knife, making a cross for a friend killed in the Forêt de Caking. 0647. First light. The Germans came. The 11th Panzer Division's reconnaissance reported the ridgeline undefended, a catastrophic intelligence failure. At 0723 German tanks, including 12 Panthers, advanced in column formation directly toward Company A's positions. The Germans expected to occupy the ridge themselves, using it as a firing platform for their own operations. Instead, they drove into a killing field. Staff Sergeant Rivers watched through his commander's periscope as the German column emerged from morning mist, black crosses vivid on gray-green hulls. The Panthers led, massive and predatory, turrets traversing slowly as they scanned for threats. Behind them, smaller Mark IV, medium tanks, and Sturmgeschütz assault guns. The column stretched half a mile, moving at cautious speed across open farmland. Rivers keyed his radio. All able units, hold fire. Let them close. Wait for my command. His voice was steady, no tremor. Around him, 14 other Sherman commanders watched the Germans approach. The range closed to 1,500 yards, 1,300, 1,000. The German column continued, oblivious. Later analysis would suggest the Germans genuinely didn't believe American armor would be positioned on the ridge, and specifically didn't believe that a Negro tank battalion would be competent enough to execute an ambush. At 800 yards, Rivers transmitted, all able units, fire at will. Traverse right. Lead tanks first. Fire. 15 Sherman guns fired within 3 seconds of each other. The ridge erupted in smoke and flame. The concentrated volley struck the German column like a physical wave. 3 Panthers took direct hits. One exploded instantly as a lucky shot penetrated the thinner rear deck armor and detonated ammunition. 2 Mark IVs lurched to a halt, tracks shredded. A Sturmgeschütz tilted sideways into a ditch, crew bailing out under machine gun fire. The German column disintegrated into chaos. Tanks scattered, seeking cover that didn't exist. Return fire came immediately. High-velocity, armor-piercing rounds screamed overhead or smashed into the ridge, throwing dirt and rock. One round struck Able 5's turret, glancing off but killing the tank commander, Lieutenant William McBurney, who had his head exposed. Rivers's loader, Horatio Scott, worked like a machine. Grab shell, slam breech, tap gunner's shoulder, duck. The 75mm gun fired every 8 seconds. High explosive. Armor piercing. High explosive. Armor piercing. The rhythm of industrial death. Spent shell casings piled ankle deep on the turret floor, rolling underfoot, still too hot to touch. But the Germans recovered quickly. Veteran crews, battle-hardened in Russia, executed immediate action drills. The surviving Panthers identified the ridgeline threat and began long-range suppression fire. At 1,200 yards, their guns were murderously effective. Able 7 took a penetrating hit through the glacis, killing the driver and setting the engine ablaze. Able 11's gun was destroyed, the barrel bent like a pretzel by a direct hit. Able 3, already damaged in the foret decoaking and hastily repaired, took 2 hits in rapid succession and exploded, turret cartwheeling through the air. The German infantry, riding on the tanks, dismounted and began advancing on foot, using a small creek bed for concealment. They carried Panzerschreck's German bazookas, capable of destroying a Sherman with a single hit. If they reached close range, the American position would collapse. Rivers made another critical decision. He ordered his driver to back Able 1 off the ridgeline, then accelerate forward at full speed, charging directly at the German infantry. It was tactically insane. A single tank, unsupported, attacking across open ground against dug-in infantry and anti-tank weapons. His own company would lose line of sight to support him. He'd be isolated, surrounded, almost certainly killed. He did it anyway. Able 1 roared down the reverse slope of the ridge, accelerated across 200 yards of open ground, and smashed into the creek bed at 30 miles per hour, tracks churning through mud and ice. German infantry scattered. Rivers's bow gunner, Private David Williams, poured 50 caliber fire into the creek bed at point-blank range, 30 rounds per second of thumb-sized bullets that shredded flesh and shattered bone. The tank pivoted, crushing a Panzerschreck team under its tracks, then accelerated again, chasing infantry across the field like a steel predator. For 4 minutes, Able 1 rampaged through the German infantry position, breaking their attack before it began. Rivers personally shot 3 German soldiers with his Thompson submachine gun while exposed in the turret. His driver crushed 2 anti-tank guns under the tank's treads. His gunner destroyed a German half-track attempting to evacuate wounded. Then, a Panzerschreck team, hidden in a shell crater, got lucky. The shaped charge rocket hit Able 1's right side, blowing a hole the size of a dinner plate through the sponson armor. The explosion killed Eddie Donald, the driver, instantly. Shrapnel wounded Rivers in both legs and his left arm. The tank lurched to a halt, engine still running, but no one conscious enough to drive. Horatio Scott, the loader, grabbed Rivers and dragged him out of the turret. George Davis, the gunner, provided covering fire with a 30 caliber machine gun ripped from its mount. They carried Rivers 200 yards under fire, back toward the American lines, leaving Able 1 burning behind them. Meanwhile, on the ridge, the remaining 12 Shermans of Company A continued the fight. Company C, positioned on the left flank, engaged German tanks attempting to flank the position. The battle devolved into a chaotic brawl. Tanks maneuvering at close range, firing and being fired upon from multiple directions. Technical Sergeant Samuel Turley, commanding Charlie 6, destroyed 3 Panthers in 11 minutes, a feat that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. His method was simple and terrifying. He ordered his driver to charge directly at Panthers at maximum speed, closing to within 300 yards before firing. At that range, the Sherman's gun could penetrate, but it required nerves of absolute steel to drive directly toward a gun that could kill you at any second. Turley's driver, Private James Robinson, executed without hesitation. 3 times they charged, 3 times they fired, 3 times a Panther exploded. On the 4th charge, Charlie 6 took a hit that destroyed the gun mantlet but didn't penetrate. Turley couldn't fire, but he could still maneuver. He rammed the German tank, a Panther, backing up after losing a track, and crushed it against a stone wall. Both crews survived, but were captured when German infantry surrounded the immobilized tanks. By 0930, the German attack had failed. Of 23 German tanks that entered the engagement, 17 were destroyed or abandoned. The 11th Panzer Division withdrew in disorder, leaving burning hulks and dead infantry across 3 miles of French farmland. American losses: 8 Shermans destroyed, 11 damaged, 19 tankers killed, 31 wounded. But the ridgeline held. 3rd Army G2 Intelligence Section analyzed the battle immediately. A frontline report reached Patton's headquarters by noon. The summary was clinical. 761st Tank Battalion successfully defended assigned sector against numerically superior armored attack. Enemy losses estimated 17 tanks, 200 infantry. Recommended for commendation. Patton reportedly read the report twice, said nothing, and filed it. But word spread through 3rd Army. A Negro tank battalion had fought German panzers to a standstill. Not just survived, won. Decisively. The doubters had their answer. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers refused medical evacuation. His wounds were serious, severe lacerations on both legs, a compound fracture of the left arm, severe burns on his hands and face. The battalion surgeon, Captain David Carger, a white doctor from Philadelphia, personally treated Rivers in a field aid station and explicitly ordered him evacuated to a rear area hospital. Rivers refused. "My men are still fighting," he said. "I'm going back." Carger couldn't legally override a soldier's refusal of medical treatment unless the soldier was incapacitated. Rivers was ambulatory, coherent, and stubborn. Carger did what he could, cleaned the wounds, administered sulfa drugs and morphine, applied bandages, and released Rivers back to duty. It was a decision both men would regret. November 9th through 15th, the 761st continued offensive operations, despite their losses at Arracourt. They received 12 replacement Shermans but no replacement crews. The Army had no black tankers in the replacement pipeline because officially the 761st wasn't supposed to need them. They'd been expected to fail immediately and transition to service duties. Now, combat proven, they were overstrength on equipment, but desperately short on men. Surviving crews were reorganized. Ruben Rivers, barely able to walk, resumed command of a new tank, call sign Able 17. His wounds hadn't healed, they'd worsened. Infection set in. He ran a fever of 102 degrees. He could barely grip the commander's override controls with his burned hands. He stayed in the fight. November 16, 1944. The 761st attacked the village of Gwebling, a German strongpoint, blocking 3rd Army's advance. Company A led the assault. Rivers commanded from Able 17, leading 15 Shermans in column formation down a sunken road flanked by hedgerows. It was terrible terrain for tanks, restricted maneuvering room, limited visibility, high ground on both flanks, perfect for German anti-tank ambush. At 0800, the ambush came. German 88mm guns, originally designed as anti-aircraft weapons, but devastatingly effective against tanks, opened fire from concealed positions on the high ground. The first round struck Able 17's right track, immobilizing the tank. The second round penetrated the turret, killing Rivers instantly. He was 26 years old. He'd been in combat for 14 days. His crew evacuated the burning Sherman under fire, carrying his body. They reached American lines, at a cost of 2 more wounded. Later that day, Company A, now under the command of Captain Ivan Harrison, completed the assault on Gwebling, destroying the German guns and securing the village. Rivers was posthumously awarded the Silver Star. 52 years later, in 1997, President Bill Clinton upgraded the award to the Medal of Honor, the first black tanker so honored in American history. The delay was purely racial. Rivers's actions at Arracourt and his refusal to leave his men despite mortal wounds met the Medal of Honor standard on November 16, 1944. But the Army of 1944 didn't award its highest decoration to Negro soldiers, except under overwhelming political pressure. Rivers was dead. He had no political constituency. The medal waited 5 decades. The 761st fought until Germany surrendered. They participated in the relief of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, arriving on December 31, 1944, to reinforce the besieged 101st Airborne Division. They pushed into Germany itself, crossing the Siegfried Line in March 1945. They liberated concentration camps, witnessing atrocities that left even combat-hardened veterans physically ill. On May 5, 1945, the battalion reached the Austrian border. The war in Europe ended 3 days later. In 183 consecutive days of combat, the 761st Tank Battalion had advanced farther and faster than almost any other tank battalion in Third Army. They'd fought in 6 countries: France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Austria. They'd destroyed or captured over 400 German tanks, assault guns, and armored vehicles. They'd killed an estimated 6,000 German soldiers and captured an additional 11,000. American losses: 71 killed in action, 296 wounded, 14 missing. Every tank in the battalion was destroyed at least once, many twice, some 3 times. General George Patton, who initially opposed their deployment, wrote in his diary in March 1945, "The 761st has been a credit to its race." The condescension was still there. Its race, not their nation or this army. But it was the closest Patton came to instating, admitting he'd been wrong. The 761st Tank Battalion returned to the United States in June 1945, sailing from Le Havre aboard a Liberty ship that segregated black troops below decks while white troops occupied cabins with portholes. The battalion docked in New York Harbor. There was no parade, no ticker tape, no ceremony. They were processed through Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, still a segregated base, and granted 30-day furlough before expected redeployment to the Pacific for the invasion of Japan. Men scattered to Oklahoma, Georgia, Illinois, Texas, returning home in uniform to towns that still enforced Jim Crow, still denied them basic dignities, still required them to enter through back doors and drink from colored fountains. Staff Sergeant Warren Crecy, the gunner who'd earned 4 Silver Stars, returned to Kosciuszko, Mississippi. He entered a diner in uniform, medals visible, and was told to leave. Coloreds weren't served. He left without incident. What else could he do? He'd fought for a nation that wouldn't serve him coffee. Technical Sergeant Samuel Turley returned to Dalton, Georgia. Local police stopped him on the street, demanded to know where he'd stolen the uniform. When he explained he was a combat veteran, they arrested him for disrespecting a white officer, the police sergeant. He spent 3 days in jail before the charges were quietly dropped. This was the aftermath of victory. This was the legacy of service. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 canceled the invasion of Japan. The 761st was deactivated on November 1, 1945, at Camp Hood, Texas, the same base where they'd trained under segregation, the same base where Jackie Robinson had been court-martialed for refusing to accept second-class citizenship. The men were discharged and sent home. No GI Bill assistance for many Southern banks refused loans to Negro veterans, schools refused admissions, employers refused jobs. The promises of veterans' benefits were applied selectively, by race. But the battalion itself, the unit, the lineage, the legacy that couldn't be erased. The official citations came slowly, grudgingly. The 761st Tank Battalion received a Presidential Unit Citation in 1945, the only independent tank battalion in Third Army so honored. Individual awards. 1 Medal of Honor. Ruben Rivers, awarded 1997. 11 Distinguished Service Crosses. Approximately 296 Silver Stars. Approximately 461 Bronze Stars. 302 Purple Hearts. These numbers are approximate because the Army's award documentation for Negro units was notoriously incomplete. Awards were often downgraded or lost in processing. Commanders recommended, headquarters denied. The pattern was consistent across all black combat units. The battalion coat of arms, approved in 1944, featured a Black Panther's head over crossed tank treads, with the motto, "Come Out Fighting," emblazoned below. The Panthers' eyes were red, symbolizing both aggression and the blood spilled to prove their worth. The design was officially sanctioned, but rarely displayed in Army publications until decades later. The 761st's lineage was preserved in the modern Army. The unit was reactivated in 1947 as part of the Army Reserve, deactivated again in 1955, reactivated in 1972. As of 2025, elements of the modern 301st Brigade Combat Team, 1st Infantry Division, carry the 761st's lineage and heraldry, the Black Panther patch, still worn, still honored. Memorials came even slower than medals. The first significant memorial to the 761st wasn't erected until 1997 in Fort Riley, Kansas, 52 years after the war ended. It features a bronze plaque and a restored M4 Sherman tank painted with Company A's markings. The inscription reads, "Their valor and sacrifice proved that courage knows no color." A second memorial was dedicated in 2007 in Bastogne, Belgium, honoring all black combat units that fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Local Belgian citizens funded it entirely, not the American or Belgian governments. Belgian school children still lay flowers there every Memorial Day. In Morville-les-Vic, France, the village nearest to the Arracourt battlefield, a small plaque on the town church reads, in French, "Here, the Black Panthers held the line." Never forgotten. It was placed by villagers in 1991, after elderly residents who remembered the battle petitioned their local government. No American official attended the dedication. The broader legacy of the 761st extends beyond bronze and stone. Their combat record became evidence ammunition in the post-war fight to desegregate the military. When President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, ordering the desegregation of the armed forces, the 761st's record was cited explicitly in the supporting documentation. Military analysts reviewed their performance. The conclusions were undeniable. The 761st had performed as well or better than equivalent white tank battalions under identical conditions. Their maintenance metrics exceeded Army averages. Their gunnery scores ranked in the top tier. Their advance rates and enemy kill ratios were statistically indistinguishable from white units. The only significant difference was casualty rates slightly higher, likely because black units were given more dangerous missions and denied adequate replacements. In other words, the experiment proved what should never have needed proving. Soldiers are soldiers, regardless of race. Courage, competence, and commitment aren't distributed by skin color. But institutional change moved slowly. The Army didn't fully desegregate until 1954, nearly a decade after the war ended. The Marines didn't desegregate their officer corps until 1956. The patterns of prejudice died harder than the soldiers who proved them false. Individual veterans of the 761st lived long enough to see change. Warren Crecy, The 4 Silver Star gunner lived until 2009, dying at age 89 in New Jersey. He spent his post-war years as a high school janitor, a decorated war hero mopping floors because no engineering firm would hire him. He never complained. When interviewed by historians, he said only, "We did what needed doing. That's enough." Floyd Dade, who'd operated the Chicago construction equipment before the war, became a truck driver after. He died in 1994, age 73. His obituary in the Chicago Defender mentioned his military service in a single sentence. E5, William McBurney, the lieutenant killed at Arracourt, is buried in the American Cemetery at Epinal, France. His grave marker reads, Lieutenant, 761st Tank Battalion, Medal of Honor recommended, downgraded to Silver Star. Rest in peace. The downgraded notation was added by the cemetery staff in 2003 after researchers documented the pattern of award reductions for black soldiers. It's unofficial, possibly against regulations, but it remains. The 761st story was largely forgotten in mainstream American culture for decades. Hollywood made dozens of World War II tank movies, none featured black tankers. History textbooks taught the war but rarely mentioned segregation in the military. The Greatest Generation narrative focused on unity and shared sacrifice, conveniently omitting the fact that sacrifice was shared under a system of enforced inequality. That began to change in the 1990s. Historians like Mary Motley, Gail Buckley, and Christopher Paul Moore documented black combat units comprehensively. Their research forced a reckoning. In 2004, the documentary Come Out Fighting told the 761st story to national audiences. In 2014, HBO produced The Liberators, focusing on black tank crews in Europe. In 2019, the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., opened a permanent exhibit on black military service. The centerpiece, a restored M4 Sherman in 761st markings, with video testimony from surviving veterans playing on a loop. Visitors can sit in the tank, feel the cramped space. Imagine fighting inside a steel box while your own nation denies you humanity. The last verified living veteran of the 761st, Russell Guthrie, died in September 2021 at age 98. He'd served as a driver in Company C, survived the war without physical wounds but carried psychological scars his family only understood decades later. At his funeral in Detroit, 3 generations of his family wore Black Panther pins. The local American Legion post, once segregated, now integrated, provided military honors. With his death, the battalion passed fully into history. No more first-hand testimony. No more living memory. Only documents, photographs, artifacts, and the responsibility of later generations to remember accurately, to tell the truth completely, to honor without sanitizing. The 761st Tank Battalion fought 2 enemies, the German Wehrmacht and American racism. They defeated the first decisively. The second took longer, cost more, and the victory remains incomplete. Their legacy is this: they proved that dignity cannot be denied, only delayed. That courage transcends the prejudices of those too small to recognize it. That the arc of justice bends slowly, but it bends because people like Ruben Rivers, Warren Crecy, Samuel Turley, and 397 other Black Panthers pushed it with their hands, their blood, their lives. They came out fighting. They never stopped. The Germans who faced them at Arracourt learned quickly. The Black Panthers were no experiment. They were soldiers, as deadly and determined as any in Third Army. The Americans who doubted them learned the same lesson, though some never admitted it. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers wrote one final letter, found in his effects after his death. It was unfinished, addressed to his mother. The last line read, "If I don't come home, Mama, tell them we proved it. Tell them we were soldiers." He was. They all were. Their story must be remembered not as a footnote, not as an exception, but as the truth of what they endured and what they achieved. The 761st Tank Battalion fought for a nation that didn't yet believe in them. They won anyway. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. Come out fighting. Always.